empath withdraws their energy, the narcissist collapses. This is not merely a social observation, but the truth that belongs to the deepest structures of the psyche. It is an image that rises out of the unconscious itself. For in every relationship there is a hidden economy, a circulation of psychic energy, a flow of vitality from one soul to another. The empath is often unaware of the intensity of what they are giving. They imagine they are simply caring, listening, softening the edges of another's pain. But beneath this is the archetype of the healer, the sacrificer, the Christ figure who bleeds silently while others drink of their blood. The narcissist, on the other hand, moves under the shadow of another archetype, the devourer, the parasite, the vampire of old myths. In every culture we see its reflection beings who cannot sustain themselves, who must drink the life of another in order to appear alive. In the analytic hour, I often observed that those who carried the burden of empathy felt simultaneously blessed and cursed. They entered rooms and felt the atmosphere before a single word was spoken. They carried home with them the pain of strangers, the unspoken conflicts of colleagues, the despair of lovers. When they encountered a narcissist, it was as though iron filings met a magnet. The narcissist's hollow center pulled at their fullness, and the empath, without knowing, poured themselves into that emptiness. What ensued was a bond that seemed fated, as though spun by invisible hands, yet it was a bond woven not by love, but by the unconscious compulsion of shadow and wound meeting across two souls. The empath believes they are healing, yet at the core they are replaying a pattern from childhood, perhaps even from generations before them. They became attuned to others' needs because they had to survive in an environment where their own needs were unseen. Thus, their sensitivity is not merely a gift, it is a scar that has been alchemized into perception. The narcissist, in contrast, was often deprived of the mirror of authentic love. They built a false self, a mask of grandeur to protect against unbearable emptiness. And so, when these two meet, one offers boundless energy, the other devours it. And a dance begins that feels eternal. But the psyche does not allow eternity in such imbalance. Deep within the empath, there comes a moment of recognition. It may arrive in a dream where they see themselves as a vessel being drained, or as a candle burning while another sits in its light. It may come in the form of fatigue that no sleep can cure, or an anxiety that vibrates through their bones. This is the soul whispering, withdraw, reclaim, step back. And when they do, when they draw back the river of energy, the narcissist faces the collapse, the mask shatters, the emptiness yawns open, and they are forced to confront the void they had covered with borrowed light. This collapse is terrifying, but it is also potentially redemptive. For only in collapse does the narcissist encounter the truth of their own emptiness. Yet most do not endure it. They rage, manipulate, or seek another empath to plug the wound. The empath, meanwhile, faces their own initiation. To withdraw energy is not merely an act of resistance, it is an act of individuation. It is the moment when they turn from being a mirror for others into becoming a vessel for their own soul. It is the descent into the underworld, where they meet their shadow, the part of themselves that has longed to say no, that has longed to claim space, that has longed to live without carrying the burdens of others. In myth, we see this everywhere. Persephone must descend into Hades to claim her power as queen of the underworld. Orpheus must turn inward and risk losing what he loves. Even Christ must withdraw into the desert, away from the clamor of the crowd, to face the darkness alone. The empath's withdrawal is not abandonment, but initiation. It is the drawing back of projection, the recognition that the divine spark within them is not meant to be endlessly sacrificed to feed the shadows of another. At this point, the empath feels the paradox. To withdraw feels cruel, almost violent, for their nature has been to give. Yet in truth, it is the most compassionate act, for it allows both souls the chance to face themselves. Without the withdrawal, both remain trapped, the empath in exhaustion, the narcissist in illusion. With withdrawal, the possibility of transformation opens. When I worked with patients whose lives revolved around such dynamics, I often listened to their dreams. The dreams were more honest than their waking stories. An empath might dream of being chased by a figure demanding blood, or of living in a house with walls that leaked water endlessly. These images revealed the psychic reality, a constant draining, a lack of containment. When they finally began to withdraw, the dreams shifted. They dreamed of building new houses, of planting gardens, of protecting sacred spaces. The unconscious spoke clearly. The energy that had been given outward could now nourish the inner life. And for the narcissist, if they allowed collapse to unfold, dreams of broken mirrors, of empty halls, of lost crowns would emerge. These were the symbols of the false self-cracking, sometimes, rarely, but profoundly. They would then dream of a small child appearing after vaping, sometimes hidden in a corner. That child was the abandoned true self, the root of their emptiness. To meet that child was to begin the long, painful road of healing. The archetypal pattern is thus one of vampirism and withdrawal, collapse and rebirth. It is not limited to individuals, but is woven into cultures, religions, and societies. Whole nations live as empaths, giving their energy away to powers that exploit them, until finally they awaken and withdraw. Then the empire collapses. The tyrant crumbles, and something new emerges. It is a law of psychic life. What is sustained artificially by theft cannot endure once the flow is withdrawn. So when you hear the phrase, when the empath withdraws their energy, the narcissist collapses, do not hear it merely as advice for relationships. Hear it as a revelation of the hidden mechanics of the psyche. Hear it as a call to turn inward, to recognize where in your own life you are giving what is sacred to that which cannot give back. The act of withdrawal is not rejection, it is consecration. It is saying, my energy is not a resource for shadows, but a flame for the individuation of my own soul. You must understand that this act of withdrawal is not a sudden rebellion against another, but rather the unfolding of a law within the depths of the psyche. Life itself moves toward balance, and the unconscious does not tolerate the endless waste of psychic energy. The empath has for too long lived in the pattern of sacrifice, not realizing that the fire of their inner life was meant to illuminate their own path. The narcissist, on the other hand, has for too long lived on borrowed light, constructing a false sun out of the warmth and radiance of others. When this circuit breaks, the collapse is inevitable, but collapse, though it terrifies the conscious ego, is the necessary precondition for transformation. Imagine the archetype of the vampire. It is a figure that has haunted human imagination for centuries, appearing in myth, in folklore, in dreams. It is not an accident. The vampire represents the psyche that cannot generate life from within and must therefore steal it from the living. The empath, often unknowingly, becomes the chosen victim for their openness, their permeability. Their unguarded heart makes them susceptible. Yet, in the story of the vampire, there is always a crucial moment. The victim awakens to what is happening, recognizes the danger, and withdraws. Sometimes they confront, sometimes they flee, sometimes they simply refuse to be bitten again. The vampire then withers, for it has no source of life apart from the blood it takes. This is a symbol, and like all symbols, it reveals a truth of the soul. But I tell you, the empath's withdrawal is not simply a triumph. It is also a confrontation with their own shadow. For if you have built your identity around being the one who gives, who heals, who carries the burdens of others, then to withdraw is to step into an unfamiliar wilderness. The shadow appears, whispering, "You are selfish, you are cruel, you are abandoning." These are not merely thoughts. They are ancestral voices, the residue of childhood conditioning, perhaps even collective voices from the culture that glorifies the martyr and condemns the one who dares to claim autonomy. The empath, in this moment, must wrestle with the angel of their own shadow. As Jacob wrestled through the night until dawn, only by passing through this fire does the empath discover that their energy is not infinite, that their soul has boundaries, that to give without limit is not love, but a disguised form of fear, the fear of being unloved if they do not give. In this discovery, they begin to individuate. They begin to see themselves not as a role, but as a soul. They realize that to give authentically is only possible when one has first received from the depths of one's own being. Now, let us turn to the narcissist in their collapse. It is tempting to imagine this only as a punishment, a deserved suffering. But in the symbolic language of the psyche, collapse is also revelation. The narcissist, when deprived of external supply, faces the barren desert within. The mirror they held up to the world now cracks, and they are confronted with the absence behind it. If they can endure this, if they can resist the temptation to immediately find another empath to drain, then the collapse can be the beginning of rebirth. But this is exceedingly rare, for it requires them to meet the most terrifying figure of all, the abandoned child within. Dreams often reveal this moment with piercing clarity. A narcissistic patient, after losing the attention of those who once adored them, might dream of standing on a stage before an empty theater. They continue to perform, but no one watches. They wake in terror, for the dream exposes the futility of the mask without an audience. Another dream might show them wandering through endless hallways filled with mirrors. Yet, none reflects their image. The unconscious is telling them, the self you have built is not real. Go deeper. Find the child you buried. If, in this collapse, they see the weeping child, the small, tender part of the psyche that once longed for unconditional love and never received it, then there is a chance of integration. For the empath, this image is instructive. To withdraw energy is not to destroy the narcissist, but to give them the only chance they have of meeting their child. The empath's energy has shielded the narcissist from this confrontation. Withdrawal removes the shield and forces the meeting. Whether the narcissist accepts it or flees depends on their courage. You see, in this entire dynamic, both empath and narcissist are caught in archetypal patterns larger than themselves. The empath plays the role of the healer, the sacrificer, the saint. The narcissist plays the role of the tyrant, the devourer, the false king. These are not personal inventions, but eternal figures in the collective unconscious. That is why the bond between them feels fated, as though written in the stars. Yet individuation requires that we step out of identification with the archetype and reclaim our own soul. The empath must realize, I am not only the healer. The narcissist must realize, I am not only the king. Only then does freedom emerge. Withdrawal, therefore, is not simply a behavioral decision. It is a psychic ritual. It is as though the empath draws a magic circle around themselves and declares, here I end. There you begin. This circle is sacred. Within it lies the possibility of dialogue with the self, with the deep center of the psyche. The energy once wasted outward now descends inward, illuminating the inner landscape. Dreams become vivid, synchronicities arise, forgotten passions awaken. It is as if the soul, long deprived, drinks from its own well. And let me tell you this, the narcissist's collapse through is a ritual. Though darker and more dangerous, it is the descent into the underworld without a guide, for when the mask breaks, they fall into chaos. They may lash out, rage, seduce, manipulate anything to avoid the encounter with the abyss. But if they allow themselves to fall fully, they may at last meet the true self. This is the meaning of so many myths of descent. Inanna stripped of her garments, Christ descending into hell, Osiris dismembered before being reassembled. The collapse is death before rebirth. The empath, in their withdrawal, often dreams of reclaiming lost objects. A woman once told me she dreamed of finding her childhood toys in an attic after leaving a destructive relationship. Another dreamed of discovering a locked box filled with letters written by her younger self. These are symbols of psychic restoration. What was given away is returning the inner child to emerges not as a wound, but as a source of vitality. This is the true fruit of withdrawal. Not coldness, not rejection, but restoration of the self. The narcissist's collapse, however, is more perilous. If they resist, if they seek only to replace one empath with another, then the cycle continues and the void deepens. They may become more desperate, more manipulative, more hollow. But if they endure, if they allow themselves to meet the loneliness, then the collapse becomes initiation. They may then dream of building, of planting, of nurturing a rare but profound sign that the true self has been rediscovered. So, when we speak of this dynamic, we must not trivialize it into moral categories of good and bad. It is archetypal. It is the meeting of healer and tyrant, of sacrificer and devourer, of light and shadow. The empath's withdrawal is not an act of cruelty, but a necessity for the evolution of both souls. The narcissist's collapse is not merely a punishment, but a potential doorway into authenticity. The question is whether either will have the courage to walk through. And for you who listen, I say, look within your own life. Where are you giving endlessly, not out of love but out of compulsion? Where have you allowed another to live on your energy, while your own soul withers? Where do you fear to withdraw because you dread the accusation of selfishness? And conversely, where in yourself do you live as the narcissist, demanding attention, fleeing the silence that might expose your emptiness? Both poles live within us. The empath and the narcissist are not only people we meet, but figures in our own psyche. The task of individuation is to integrate them, to allow the healer and the king to meet, not in distortion, but in wholeness. When the empath withdraws their energy, the narcissist collapses. Yes, but do not imagine that this collapse occurs only in the outer world. It also takes place inside you, within the psychic theater, where archetypes enact their eternal drama. Each of us carries both poles. Each of us knows the longing to give until nothing remains. And each of us knows the hunger to be filled at any cost. To see these forces in another person is only the beginning. The deeper task is to recognize them in yourself. For it is not enough to flee the narcissist outside you, if the narcissist within you remains unseen. Nor is it enough to stop giving outwardly. If you continue to abandon your own soul inwardly, the collapse then becomes a mirror. The empath sees in the narcissist's desperation a reflection of their own hidden hunger for validation. And the narcissist, if they are honest, sees in the empath's withdrawal a reflection of their own refusal to nourish themselves. In this way, the relationship, as painful as it is, becomes alchemical. It is the vessel in which both souls are burned until their impurities rise to the surface. The question is whether they will endure the fire or escape it. Consider the image of alchemy. The first stage is called the nigredo, the blackening, the dissolution. Everything is broken down, reduced to chaos. This is what happens when the empath withdraws. The narcissist plunges into nigredo, and the empath too, for they must confront their shadow. Then comes the albedo, the whitening, where clarity begins to emerge, where the soul washes itself in the waters of truth. The empath in this stage begins to see, I am not only valuable because I give, I am valuable because I am. The narcissist, if they reach this stage, begins to see, I am not the mask I wear. I am the child I once abandoned. And then, after long struggle, comes the rubedo, the reddening, the integration, where spirit and matter unite, where the self becomes whole. This is the possibility hidden within the collapse, yet we must not romanticize this process. The majority do not endure it. The empath often returns to giving, seduced by guilt or pity. The narcissist often finds another empath, another source of supply. The cycle repeats, sometimes for years, sometimes for lifetimes. But when the cycle breaks, when the empath holds their boundary, when they remain in the sacred circle of their own soul, then the unconscious rejoices, for individuation has begun. I recall the dream of a woman who had ended such a relationship. She saw herself walking through a vast forest at night, carrying only a lantern. Behind her, a figure followed, demanding light, but she turned and said, "This flame is mine." At that moment, the forest burst into illumination, not from her lantern, but from countless stars above. The dream revealed the truth. When she guarded her inner flame, the greater light of the cosmos aligned with her. This is what the empath must learn. To guard one's own energy is not isolation, but alignment with the self. The archetype of wholeness Now let us look at the narcissist again, for their collapse is not without meaning. In myth, the false king always falls. The tower built on sand always crumbles. The mask cannot endure. This is not cruelty, but justice in the psyche. The collapse strips away illusion, if the narcissist can see it, if they can allow the humiliation, the loneliness, the terror, then they stand at the threshold of true power. For true kingship is not domination but service, not hunger but fullness. The archetype of the king in its light form is the one who blesses, who nourishes, who creates order. But to reach this, the false king must die, and that death feels like collapse. When I worked with men who embodied this archetype, I often saw their dreams filled with broken crowns, shattered throats, toppled statues. At first they resisted, insisting they were meant to rule, meant to be admired. But as the dreams repeated, some began to understand the kingdom they ruled was an illusion. The true kingdom lay within, and only by abdicating the false throne could they inherit the real one. This is the paradox of the collapse. It destroys the false in order to reveal the true. The empath, meanwhile, undergoes a different transformation. In their withdrawal, they meet their own shadow, anger, selfishness, desire for freedom. At first, these feel like sins, but in truth, they are medicine, for the shadow contains the very qualities the empath needs to become whole. Without anger, they cannot protect their boundaries. Without selfishness, they cannot nourish their soul. Without desire, they cannot follow their own path. To withdraw is to embrace these exiled parts. It is to say, I am not only the giver, I am also the one who longs, the one who demands, the one who says no. In this integration, they cease to be merely an empath and become a whole person. Do you see the symmetry? The narcissist must descend from false kingship into humility. The empath must ascend from false humility into sovereignty. One must lose power to find truth. The other must claim power to find truth. Both journeys converge in the same place, the realization of the self. Now, consider the collective dimension. Our culture itself often plays out this drama. Nations act as empaths, giving their resources away until they collapse. Others act as narcissists, devouring until they implode. The same laws apply. Collapse comes when the flow is withdrawn, when the exploited rise, when the unconscious refuses to sustain the imbalance. History is filled with such collapses, empires that fed on others' energy until they fell into ruin. These are not merely political events, they are archetypal enactments of the same psychic drama that unfolds in personal relationships. And here lies the final mystery. The empath's withdrawal is also the soul's withdrawal from illusion. In dreams, this is often shown as leaving a decaying city, stepping out of a collapsing house, walking away from a banquet of rotten food. The unconscious shows the truth. The old structure cannot sustain you. Withdraw or perish. And when you do, the collapse is not yours. It is the collapse of what was false. Therefore, I say to you, do not fear withdrawal. Do not fear the collapse. Both are necessary. Both are holy. When you withdraw your energy, you return it to the source. You become aligned with the self, the inner Christ, the inner Buddha, the archetype of wholeness that dwells within. And when the narcissist collapses, do not rejoice in their downfall, but see in it the possibility of rebirth, for every collapse conceals the seed of transformation. The question is whether one will water it with truth or bury it again in denial. And you who listen now, feel these words not as theory but as invocation. Where in your life do you need to withdraw? Where do you need to let another collapse so that both of you may awaken? And where within yourself do you need to allow collapse, to let the false masks fall, to let the hungry ghosts die so that the child within may live again? For this is the deepest truth. When the empath withdraws and the narcissist collapses, what emerges is not destruction, but the possibility of wholeness. When the empath withdraws their energy and the narcissist collapses, the drama may appear finished, but in truth, it is only the threshold of a deeper mystery. For what collapses in that moment is not only a relationship, not only a dynamic between two people, but an entire way of seeing the world. The empath has long believed that their worth lies in what they give, that their survival depends upon tuning themselves to the frequencies of others. The narcissist has long believed that their existence is sustained by being adored, by being reflected, by being made larger than life. When the bond breaks, when the river of energy ceases to flow, both illusions tremble, and yet the psyche does not leave us with nothing. Collapse is the prelude to revelation. The empath, who once felt invisible, unless they gave, begins to see the paradoxical light of their own presence. Alone, stripped of the role of healer, they discover that there is a vast reservoir within them that does not depend on others. They realize that sensitivity is not only a wound, but a doorway into communion with the unconscious, with symbols, with dreams. For when their energy no longer bleeds outward, it pour inward, and the soul begins to speak more clearly. They hear their own voice in the silence, and it is not weak, it is the voice of the self, the eternal archetype of wholeness. The narcissist, who once felt alive only in the gaze of others, faces an opposite revelation. Deprived of mirrors, they must turn inward. At first this is unbearable. The silence echoes, the emptiness roars. They thrash against it, seeking someone, anyone, to rescue them from the abyss. But if they endure, if they resist the temptation to replace the empath immediately, then something extraordinary can happen. They may hear, faintly at first, the cry of the child they abandoned long ago. That child is not grand, not admired, not applauded. That child is small, needy, vulnerable. But that child is real. To embrace the child is to begin the path of authenticity. Do you see? Both empath and narcissist are forced in different ways to meet the child within. The empath meets the child who was burdened with responsibility too soon, who learned that love must be earned through self-sacrifice. The narcissist meets the child who was starved of recognition, who built a false mask to hide the shame of invisibility. Both children weep, both are wounded, both long to be seen, and in this parallel recognition lies the secret. What appeared as opposites are, at the root, two branches of the same tree. Both empath and narcissist are born of neglect, of abandonment, of unmet needs. Their dance is the meeting of two wounded children, one who gave too much, one who demanded too much. When the empath withdraws, they finally turn to their own child, cradling them, saying, I will not abandon you again. When the narcissist collapses, they too are forced to face their child, perhaps for the first time, and to confess, I have hidden you, but now I see you. This is the true possibility of healing, not revenge, not victory, but reunion with the lost child of the soul. Yet few reach this place, for the path is narrow. Most empaths feel crushing guilt and return to giving. Most narcissists feel unbearable emptiness and flee to new supply. But if you are listening now, if you are truly hearing, then I say to you, dare to walk the narrow path, dare to hold your boundary, dare to let the collapse unfold. Do not rush to soothe it. Do not rush to repair it. Let the silence speak, for in that silence, both of you may meet the truth. This truth is not sentimental. It does not promise the restoration of the old relationship. The empath who withdraws often cannot return, for the withdrawal marks the death. The person they once were, the endless giver, the invisible healer no longer exists. The narcissist who collapses cannot return to their former mask, for the mask has cracked. If they try, it will only feel emptier. Collapse means the end of the old. It is an initiation into the unknown. And here lies the mystical dimension. Every myth, every sacred story speaks of collapse before renewal. Christ descends into the tomb before resurrection. Inanna is stripped naked in the underworld before ascending in glory. Osiris is dismembered before he is reassembled. Psyche loses love before she attains the eternal union. The empath's withdrawal and the narcissist's collapse are modern enactments of these same mysteries. They are not trivial events in private lives, but archetypal dramas in which the soul is tested and transformed. When I speak of individuation, I speak of precisely this, the courage to let what is false die, so that what is real may live. The empath must let die the false self that lives only for others. The narcissist must let die the false self that lives only for appearances. Both must descend into the underworld of the psyche, face the shadow, embrace the child, and emerge as whole beings. This is not guaranteed, but it is possible, and it is the most sacred task of human life. Do not misunderstand. Withdrawal does not mean hatred. Collapse does not mean damnation. These are not acts of cruelty, but acts of necessity. The empath who withdraws is not punishing. They are protecting. The narcissist who collapses is not cursed. They are invited. Each stands before the threshold of transformation. The empath, if they continue, becomes not only sensitive, but wise. Not only receptive, but sovereign. The narcissist, if they continue, becomes not only powerful, but compassionate. Not only admired, but authentic. Both, if they persevere, approach the self, the image of God within the wholeness that is our destiny. So I say again, when the empath withdraws their energy, the narcissist collapses, but hear it not as a sentence of doom, but as a revelation of archetypal law. The psyche demands balance. Energy must not flow endlessly one way. The unconscious will not sustain lies forever. Eventually the flow ceases. The mask breaks. The collapse comes, and though it feels like destruction, it is also the hidden doorway into rebirth in your own life. Ask yourself, where must you withdraw? What false structures must you let collapse? What child within you waits to be seen? Do not fear the silence that follows. For it is in the silence that the self speaks. Dreams will guide you. Symbols will rise. Synchronicities will appear. The unconscious does not abandon those who dare to follow this path. It will show you images of renewal if you have the courage to see. And if you are the one collapsing, if you feel the emptiness roaring inside, do not run. Do not mask it again. Do not rush to another source of energy. Sit in the abyss. Let it break you. For only when the false breaks can the true appear. Only when the mask dies can the face be revealed. Only when the child is wept for can it be embraced. This is the path of individuation, the path of wholeness, the path that leads not back to the old, but forward to the eternal. Therefore, do not pity the collapse, and do not fear the withdrawal. Both are sacred acts in the theater of the soul. Both are necessary stages in the great work of becoming whole. And if you walk this path, if you endure its terrors and its silences, you will find what every mystic, every analyst, every seeker has found. That beneath the roles, beneath the wounds, beneath the masks, there is a self that is unbroken, eternal, luminous, and in that self, you are neither empath nor narcissist, neither giver nor taker, but whole, free, alive. This is the truth I leave with you. When the empath withdraws their energy and the narcissist collapses, the world calls it tragedy, but the soul calls it initiation. It is the beginning of the end, and the end of the beginning. It is the collapse of illusion and the birth of reality. It is the descent into darkness and the discovery of light. It is the eternal rhythm of death and rebirth, enacted once more in the intimate arena of human hearts. And if you have the courage to live it consciously, it will not destroy you. It will transform you